We're good? Fantastic. Welcome to this AI Q&A. Please get warmed up, start sending questions on Swapcard, and I will introduce these lovely people, and we can get going. So, Lewis Hammond is a DPhil student in computer science at the University of Oxford, and is currently serving as the Executive Acting Director of Cooperative AI Foundation. His research concerns safety in multi-agent systems, and in practice spans game theory, machine learning, and control and verification. Rohin works as a research scientist on the technical AGI safety team at DeepMind. He completed his PhD at the Center for Human Compatible AI at UC Berkeley, where he worked on building AI systems that can learn to assist a human user, even if they don't initially know what the user wants. He's particularly interested in the big picture questions about artificial intelligence. What techniques will we use to build human-level AI systems? How will their development affect the world? What can we do to make this deployment go better? He also writes up summaries and thoughts about recent work tackling these questions in the Alignment newsletter. And Jamie Bernardi works on AI safety building at the Cambridge Effective Altruism. He is currently running the AGI Fundamentals program and works on helping students interested in careers in AI safety and governance. Welcome and thank you. Cool, so I'll give you a few minutes to start putting things on Swapcard, and I'll start with my own question while you do that. So, is there a bottleneck on specific skills on AI safety technical research? And if so, how would you go about acquiring them? Does anyone want to go first?
Yeah, I can say something about that. So I would say I haven't actually done a DeepMind hiring round yet. We're going to start one very soon, so consider applying. But I have done hiring rounds or like grad student applications at CHAI, the Center for Human Compatible AI. And I think like typically when I see applications from EAs, I wish that they had done more, they had more knowledge of just machine learning and AI and how all of that works relative to the amount that they have like, I don't know, read alignment forum blog posts or something like that. So I would say just general knowledge of both theoretical and practical of machine learning.
Yeah, I was going to say a somewhat similar thing in terms of it being, I guess, good to have like a clean, like conceptual understanding of lots of the important topics, but also just being able to build things and code things up. And this is like an area which I myself could stand to be better at. But having that intersection, the intersection of those two things, I think, is often what kind of marks a particularly kind of promising person in my eyes.
Yeah, I think all that rings true to me. I guess my reference point on this is working with recruiters who are interested in like who's been doing the AGI Safety Fundamentals program, and I think at least in industry, like orgs trying to build aligned AI, they're often looking for engineering skills that like people just graduating often don't have. So yeah, like skilling up in engineering, working with big models seems to be something that they're looking for quite often.
Maybe one other thing I'll add actually is maybe I'm like channeling the people who aren't here, but one other thing that other people might say is, and that I agree with to at least some extent, is like the ability to say anything new. Like the whole point of research is to push the boundaries of human knowledge, just in general and also in AI alignment. Like the whole way that you make, not the whole way that you make you get impact, but the major way in which you get impact is by having a new idea or some new thing that people hadn't realized before that tells us, that gives us better information of what to do when we're actually building AGI. I think it's actually quite difficult and somewhat rare for people to actually be able to say new things. They don't even have to be good things. Like we can just start with new. Obviously, eventually you want new and good things, but I think at like junior stages, I'd be more encouraging people to just say new things at all.
Great. And what about people interested in philosophy? What kind of role do you think they have in the AI space?
I think there's a lot of kind of work on AI which starts from philosophy, and then maybe is kind of often then kind of formalized and distilled down into kind of, okay, how do we actually think about building systems that are going to do certain things, namely the things that we want. And so I think that's kind of one angle. But maybe kind of if you're someone who has a philosophy background but doesn't necessarily have technical skills, I still think there's kind of important kind of an interesting work to be done in terms of kind of, really working on the kind of conceptual foundations of what it is that we want. And also, I guess, thinking about the kind of more kind of like societal or kind of governance kind of impacts and kind of intersection with those sorts of areas. That seems like definitely within the skill set of most kind of philosophy people. But it is going to be harder to have a technical AI safety career if you are just a philosopher, maybe. I don't think that's too controversial to say.
Yeah. So I agree that like all else equal, if someone had like just equal fit for all of the roles, I would not be choosing the philosophy directions to advise them to pursue. But nonetheless, I think there are philosophy directions that are useful to pursue. I just think there are other better things as well. But typically, so there are like maybe two directions here. One is the kind of philosophy that also has a lot of similarities to math, where you're like trying to figure out how to more formally and precisely state a thing. I think that is extremely I think if we could do this sort of process to concepts like trying, motivation, wanting, agency, knowledge, I think successfully doing any one of those would just be incredibly good. The main reason I'm not like pushing more people to do this is because it seems wildly intractable to me. But also, what the heck do I know? There are like lots of other people. Y'all have way more brain power in aggregate than I do. Maybe you'll find something. So that's like one avenue that I'd push philosophers down. Then on the other side, the like less mathy side, maybe I would say like that side of philosophy feels more to me like generic reasoning ability. And I'm like, man, there are so many places you can just take generic reasoning ability and do good stuff. And mostly I'd just be like, why are you doing technical alignment? You should just be doing all the other things that benefit more from general reasoning ability. Like, as Lois mentioned, AI governance is a classic example, but there are plenty of others.
Yep, I feel I wouldn't add much to that. I also wanted to say something vague, like I don't think about philosophy very much myself, but there's probably like traction in concepts like consciousness that I couldn't represent here.
So one other final thing to add is that there are kind of certain agendas within kind of even technical AI safety research which do have more of a kind of philosophy bent to them, like thinking about the kind of the foundations of decision theory and kind of the idea of kind of embedded agency, which is not this kind of less of a kind of dualistic perspective between kind of having an agent and an environment that they interact with, and more thinking about kind of what it means for an agent to be actually kind of totally embedded within some environment and there to be no kind of clean separation between the two things. And those sorts of questions and kind of making progress on those sorts of questions to the extent that progress can be made, because as Rohin said, I also kind of have the feeling that some of these are pretty intractable. You know, if you're a philosopher with those sorts of interests and skills, then that will, that's plausibly one direction you could go into.
Great, thank you. Now, what about people in sort of other engineering fields? Do you think that it would be useful for them to sort of contribute? Is there anything in mind, or do you think it's better to do something else?
So something that seems to be said more and more at the moment is that, I guess, I don't know, this is what I've heard, and maybe Rohin can speak a bit more about this as well, being actually at one of these orgs, is that there's a, I don't know, AI safety needs engineers type thing. So to the extent that kind of building very, very powerful AI systems looks a lot more like an engineering challenge than like a kind of traditional like theoretical computer science challenge or something, then people with engineering backgrounds are going to be more and more useful. And it does seem a little bit, to me at least, that is the direction that some work on kind of technical AI safety is going.
Yeah, so I'd say like there's a sense in which that's true, but it's a very small set of engineers. It's definitely not like any engineer. I would look at, software engineers who have a background in distributed systems, because like the neural nets we're building at this point are so large that even doing inference with them, you often need more than one GPU. So like distributed systems, extremely useful. Just generally being the sort of software engineer who can architect a large system, that's like valuable for, that's a very valuable person in many places, but also at AI organizations. But it does feel to me like all of these engineers are going to be software engineers or something along those lines.
Yeah, I realize I implicitly interpreted the question as being about ML engineers and software engineers, and possibly you were just asking more about engineers more generally. And sure, there was going to be similarities there, but
yeah. Oh, ML engineers are like very obviously good. Yeah. ML engineers just like, you just put them on the the technical alignment research projects, and they help, and they make progress go a lot faster. It's very obvious why we need ML engineers. I think like there are just also a variety of other software engineering disciplines that are also useful. Cybersecurity is another one that I think I didn't mention before. But if you're like, if you're like mechanical engineer, what should I do with them? I'm like, if you're like, you must use this mechanical engineer for AI alignment, I would mostly be telling them to like, go learn machine learning and become a machine learning engineer.
Cool.
Also, they could do other things, to be clear. AI alignment is not the only thing in the world.
Yeah. So I wanted to float the concept, something I've heard, I suppose. Like, given these systems are growing so large, in order to do research on them, you have to have like good grounding in engineering. In order to be an engineer, you need to understand the like concepts you're trying to probe and like, what you're doing the engineering for. So one concept I'm having is like more of a blurring between like what it means to be a research engineer and like a research scientist at some of these orgs working on building big systems. Does that seem right to you?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Cool, thank you. And what about for people who are more interested in the sort of AI safety governance path? Do you have any advice for them about maybe what the best graduate options are, how they can get mentors, how to build the skills they need in that area?
I'm just going to say probably like, I actually don't have very many sensible things to say here, because I do not know huge amounts about the kind of AI governance kind of pipeline and what it takes to be a good governance person, either kind of researcher, practitioner, whatever. So I don't know if either of you have anything, but probably, hopefully you have something better to say than that. But
I think I can channel Alan Defoe and say things that I think he might say. I think the main thing I model him as saying is like AI governance is not just this like one monolithic field the way AI alignment maybe is. AI governance is like the series of like many different problems, all of which need their own solutions that have like, some relation to each other. For one thing, they usually involve AI in some way. But like, it's like relatively tangential, and what we actually want is like a bunch of experts in each of the individual problems that maybe who talk to each other, who can be called upon, who are like making sure that the good decisions get made and not bad decisions for their own particular field of expertise. And because of this, it ends up being like far more interdisciplinary and just generally like being able to make use of a lot of people than AI alignment does. So like I would expect that like you could use people who have done like social choice theory, economics. Alan himself is in international relations, I believe. There are just a lot of different fields that could work out. So I guess if I had to give advice to someone, it would be to figure out what sorts of fields they enjoy working in, figure out how that relates to AI governance, actually check whether the problem that you're trying to solve is actually important. Maybe it isn't. But if you can like find more so than in AI alignment, you are more able to like find a field that you like and then try to figure out its application to AI governance. That's much less true in AI alignment.
Yep. I guess same as Lewis's caveat that when asked this, I usually try and find someone who knows a lot more about governance to speak to these students. But yeah, I think echoing what Rohin says, I find it's like getting great at understanding how this particular part of the world or policy works and like positioning oneself to be around to help make decisions around how AI is used as and when we develop new capabilities seems to be like my impression of how this works.
Cool, thank you. And so as people are sort of getting into AI and things, how important do you think it is to have really deep inside view models on alignment agendas? And if you think it's important, how can people build them?
Yeah, so I think previously I was like, look, the point of doing research is to push forward the bounds of human knowledge. I think it is near impossible to push forward the bounds of human knowledge unless you have like an actual model of like what's going on and how you can like make changes within that model to like lead to good things, lead to anything happening. And then ideally you steer towards the good things. This doesn't require you to have deep inside view models of all of the AI safety research agendas, not even any of the AI safety research agendas. You can build your own AI safety research agenda. That is also a way to contribute to humanity's knowledge. But it does require an inside view model of AI alignment at all. And I think if you don't have that, if you're doing a bunch of, if you're more like deferring to somebody else's model, I think you can still do useful work if you are then like working with that person on projects they have chosen that they are mentoring you on so that they can keep guiding you towards the like experiments and like actions that you should take that are actually useful. But it will be like very hard for you to navigate to those correct experiments or actions yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And then there's the obvious thing to say in which like, and so insofar as you kind of want to propose new ideas that solve problems that haven't already been solved, then understanding why current approaches don't solve those problems in kind of like a very kind of, yeah, the real reason, the kind of underlying kind of like conceptual reasons why certain things won't work for certain problems is then going to allow you to kind of, you know, address those problems, which is not a particularly kind of novel or interesting thing to say, but it's just like very, very true when doing research.
Yeah, I think this question has like slightly different flavor in my line of work of doing sort of meta field building work. I'm often like push and pull internally on like how much of an inside view I need to have on these fields that I'm recommending. It seems important to have an inside view, but also like my area of expertise is in understanding how like community building works and career development works. So like that seems like the area that I need to have an inside view in. And then the way I treat like research agendas is, and I've been thinking about this thing, which I haven't quite thought all the way through yet, which is like trying to do some sort of a worldview diversification over, which is, there's a blog post on this, which probably explains better what I mean, but like I have like put some probability on different research agendas panning out and like maybe nudge people more towards the ones I believe in most, but probably not dictating who has the most like tractable ideas myself, because this doesn't seem like my area of expertise. But agree, like for researchers, I'm keen for them to be bullish and like fight out their opinions and see who wins.
So maybe actually, Jamie, you could expand a little bit on what your experience has been like getting people into the space. How do you find about EAs sort of skilling up on ML through EA ecosystems? Does that seem to work well?
Yeah, definitely I've been thinking a lot about, so yeah, context. The main thing I do right now is run the AGI Safety Fundamentals program, which I think is like the best thing we have in terms of a curriculum that like introduces from what AGI is to like what problems we might face with super intelligent AGI, all the way through to like what things people are trying to work on. But I also don't want it to be like the be all and end all, because as Rohin says, we need new ideas, and it's more like engaging with the concepts for the first time rather than teaching people what's right or something. So people finish this course and they're definitely not all ready to be like alignment researchers straight away. So my job next is to figure out how to help people become AI safety researchers after doing this course. I have been thinking a lot about like the engineering scaling up side of things. I think one thing I'm realizing is, or one thing that's been expressed to me, which I believe is the case of getting great at ML engineering is pretty covered by non-EA channels because it's a very lucrative career and everyone needs ML engineers. So I'm not totally sure that my comparative advantage is going to be in like building new engineering upskilling programs. Maybe caveat to that is the machine learning alignment bootcamp at Redwood seemed to focus more on like transformer models, and I don't know of many resources to really learn what's going on with transformer models. I don't know if you've come across anything yourselves, and these seem important for like cutting edge large language models, which is like one path to generality, which we might consider. So yeah, in summary, becoming a great ML engineer is covered outside of EA, but maybe there's like certain flavors of ML engineering that are very new, that it's hard to gain traction on without being inside an org already.
Would you like to add anything, or should I go to the next question?
Nothing
Next
for me
question.
to add.
Yeah.
Great. So I guess as the AI movement is sort of growing and people are getting involved from lots of different areas, do you think there are any risks from it growing too fast?
Sorry, could you repeat? Of what growing too fast?
Just the sort of AI safety field growing quite rapidly at the moment.
Cool.
I think there's like one small thing which you like somewhat see, and it's not totally clear to me how much this is actually a risk, but even the use of kind of AI safety as a phrase, as opposed to say kind of AI alignment or AGI safety, often kind of leads to like, yeah, the phrase is like often somewhat like kind of co-opted, and people think about kind of like many like near-term concerns, like making sure your like robot doesn't like bump into another robot or something, which is like really valuable and like useful, but is going to probably be less important for the sorts of kind of concerns that we might have as a community. I don't know whether that's like a risk so much. You do see it happening, but also, you know, plenty of good alignment AI kind of AGI safety work is still getting done despite this kind of like broader, interesting kind of like AI safety kind of like more kind of broadly construed.
I think, yeah, the closest thing to a risk I can think of is like, we have this problem Lewis mentioned of like AI safety needs great engineers. And I think often these great engineers are already like 5 years into their career in engineering at like a big ML org rather than straight out of university. Which is why I mentioned like these paths exist already, like people are becoming great engineers, but we need to hire them into orgs trying to build aligned AI explicitly. And maybe I don't yet understand why they aren't all applying for alignment orgs. I would like to better. This like be another project that I take on later this year. But some part of it might be like mainstream credibility. And maybe the closest risk I can see is like if lots of orgs spin up and like aren't really doing valuable work, then maybe they lose some mainstream credibility. It's like, oh, this safety field isn't very tractable for people with serious goals, with like serious in inverted commas, like mainstream career goals to work at serious orgs that other people appreciate. By other people, I mean people not thinking about alignment every day like we are in this room.
Yeah. So I would echo both of these points. I would put it maybe in a broader framework of like, the thing that's bad about growth is that then there's just a lot of people, and with a lot of people, all of the edge cases that you don't worry about when you're small are now things you have to worry about. So you have to worry about, you know, somebody going on Twitter and posting a rant about how all the people in the world are terrible because they're all going to die and they didn't invest in AI safety. And then this gets like virally tweeted and everyone now hates AI safety forever or something. That's way too extreme. But like that sort of thing is the thing that you now have to worry about. You have to worry about like there are now 10,000 people who are all working on AI safety and they all mean something entirely different by the phrase. And so like when I'm trying to hire a person, they say, I'm interested in AI safety, and I get like very little information out of this. I have to like, you know, spend an additional like, you know, 2 hours interviewing them to figure out what they actually believe that I wouldn't have had to do previously. I have to rely a lot more on credentials and networks of trust. Whereas right now, I'm just like, if someone says they're interested in AI safety, I'm like much more willing to just interview them. I can't do that when there are 10,000 people applying to the AI safety roles at DeepMind. What other things are there? Had one more, but I've clearly forgotten what it was. Oh well, just general things become big, and now you need more rules and regulation and bureaucracy and like guarding against edge cases that you like got to ignore when you were like a small 100-person field.
Yeah. Also, yeah, you can see this as well just with like when any kind of research field grows, there's like a smaller and smaller number of people who kind of actually have like a good overview of like the entire field. Research gets duplicated, people kind of miscommunicate, and I mean you can see this in the kind of field of AI already because it's such a hot topic. It's just exploding. There's like way too much kind of stuff kind of shoved out there that is of low quality, and it kind of like crowds out some of the better work, and it just becomes kind of much harder to actually keep on top of kind of what is important, what's good, and how things relate to one another. But that's just a kind of general point about a research field growing more generally as opposed to AI safety specifically. You might think the stakes are higher when it comes to something like AI safety potentially, but.
Yeah, I mean, I still think it is generally good to grow the field. I'm just like, this is a predictable consequence.
Yeah.
And as a result, you're not going to get you weren't going to get linearly growing returns anyway because there are diminishing marginal returns. But this is another reason to expect sublinear returns.
Fantastic. I have another question here that says, why do very few of the people who have spent lots of time thinking about safety agree on what approaches are promising? And the example given is Miri versus ARC.
Man, you chose like two of the organizations that agree a lot. I can see how that would actually be confusing. There's like Paul and Eliezer have a ton of disagreements on some, in fact, very fundamental points. But I would say like the disagreements between like Miri and OpenAI are way, way, way larger. Why? Because it's a hard question, and like turns out that not everyone knows all of the considerations even after thinking about it for 1,000 hours. This does not seem at all like this feels just very normal. Like this would be true of most fields that were starting out and were only like 5 or 10 years old, unless they were like started by somebody publishing the definitive way to do things, which feels like what happened with information theory, for example. So ignoring cases like that, I feel like this is just usually what happens. It's sad. I wish it were not true. I wish we could just get to the right answer, but I don't feel like this is some like symptom of terribleness in AI alignment.
I think a lot of it also stems from the fact that you're like reasoning about things that don't exist yet and like might not exist for quite a long time, and it's also like not clear even when they do exist exactly what they'll look like and how they work, which just kind of already kind of just like splinters kind of depending on what probability kind of mass you put on different kind of outcomes or different kind of trajectories via which we might reach AGI, then this is just going to kind of like wildly skew, or could potentially wildly skew what work you think is important. Which makes things harder.
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to say, but I'll say it in different words. It's something like, without many experimental results, like there is not much empirical work proving anything that anyone is saying, either that they're problems or that people's proposed solutions work. There is some, but not much. And like without these markers of like experimental results of what works, it's difficult to agree, I suppose, on what will work.
Yeah, I think that's, like the idea of like there not being kind of feedback loops necessarily, or like tight feedback loops that you might see in other things. I think that's a good point.
Cool, thank you. We've got a few more questions. So we've got a question asking about, what do you think about working in orgs like Eleuther AI, where they work on open sourcing large language models? Do you think it would be a good way to have an impact on the AI safety?
I don't really understand Luther AI's theory of change, so I think I'm going to pass on this one.
I don't think I do either. I tried to recently.
Yeah, I didn't even try.
Okay.
So don't update on this. It's not like I went and talked to Luther AI and was unconvinced. I just literally have not tried to understand their theory of change.
I think my best cartoon sketch of their theory of change is that we making progress on AI safety, or like one good route for making progress on AI safety right now is making progress on kind of understanding and then potentially aligning these very, very large models, like large language models, which is why they've kind of recently open sourced one. And I think they also think that in order to do that, the more people who have access to these models and can potentially do this sort of work, the better, like the more likely it is that we'll get some like useful kind of progress on safety questions if just more people have access to these things. Like that's the kind of like first pass about why they are doing what they seem to be doing. I actually don't know huge amounts. I think the people there are broadly interested in safety and they do care about these things and they have thought about it quite a lot, but I also don't actually know like what safety work they are doing. Like a lot of the work, I mean, it takes a lot of work to build like a, whatever it is, like 20 billion parameter kind of like transformer model or whatever. So I think a lot of their work recently has just been in like, okay, build this thing. I don't really know in-house what they plan to do next. My guess would be that if you could choose to work for Luther, or you could choose to work on kind of like Rohin's team at DeepMind or something within OpenAI or Anthropic or one of these other orgs, then like probably chances are you're going to have more opportunity to have a bigger impact and push the field further in one of these other organizations. But that's kind of a like somewhat kind of outside view, kind of just like a Luther AI being like a little bit of an underdog. So like what would you expect sort of thing. So yeah, but I don't think I have a particularly great take on this, to be honest with you. All that is like pretty low confidence.
I think I got like one more thing out of their theory of change, which you might not have mentioned, which is kind of trying to empower normal people outside of large orgs to have, I think maybe you were saying this actually, but like have access to these models that exist behind closed doors at like OpenAI. And I see it as sort of like one take on governance is like maybe it'd be bad if only one organization had power to like all of general intelligence, or like the only candidate for general intelligence. And I guess they're just trying to like keep pace, like have open source methods keep pace. I think personally I feel a bit torn up about this because if it's open source, it could fall into anyone's hand, but I'm not sure. When it came to like actual general intelligence, as Lewis said, they are thinking about this. And I'm not sure they're actually proposing to like release general intelligence or something. So don't want to misspeak. And maybe like one other thing is the people that work on Luther AI projects, I think it's like a hobbyist organization. Like nobody's working full time, or maybe like only a couple. So it could be a good place to like gain skills in the sort of models that are being played with at OpenAI, DeepMind, etc. And in a pseudo organization where you can learn from other people too. So I guess like could be useful in on that front as well.
Earlier you talked about as we grow, there'll be fewer and fewer people sort of knowing the state of the field completely and things like that. And also as there are more and more orgs developing, more people researching, how do you think the sort of cooperation is going between people working on this at the moment?
I think Rohin's going to have a much better answer to this than me. My impression is like fairly okay. Like, I don't know, everyone seems to want like roughly the same thing and like talk to each other quite a lot, which is good. And I guess it's like the sort of thing that can work well with a kind of smaller field. I mean, I do think within any field, all of the top people in like any research field, like they talk to each other, right? But yeah, I don't know. Rohin will probably, is actually in one of these orgs and knows many more of these people than I do. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree that they all talk to each other a bunch. I mean, that's not including Elliott or AI, as evidenced by the fact that I don't know what their theory of change is. But at least, you know, I talk to people from OpenAI, Anthropic, Redwood, Arc reasonably frequently, and Miri sometimes, and Chai as well frequently. So talking definitely happens. People have some idea of what's going on. I'm like, I don't know, this is a very me specific thing. I wish people read more stuff. I haven't been writing a newsletter very much recently, but most of the time I write a weekly newsletter so that people don't have to read nearly as much stuff. And then often I find that people aren't even reading that newsletter. I'm kind of sad about this. And it feels like the community is not doing as well as I feel like it should at knowing what other people are doing. To be clear, we're probably still doing quite a bit better than most other academic fields. Mostly I just think that academics in general, people in general are don't find it very fun to look at other people's stuff and instead find it fun to do their own stuff. And we correct for it better than others, but I still feel like we're under-correcting for it. So overall, I should say, overall I'm yeah, we're doing great. We're doing better than most of the other fields. And also, I feel like I see obvious ways in which we could be doing better.
Yeah, I guess, not sure. Yeah, I think some artifact here of computer science and artificial intelligence research has always been open source, and it's probably helps us. And I don't know, I work in an org where we do other field building for other effective causes like alternative proteins, and there's a lot more patents involved there. So I guess we're kind of fortunate that the default is to publish your results on archive straight away without even needing to go through conferences, and it all moves very fast. And code is very portable, whereas machinery to do experiments is not. So I don't know, just an observation that maybe easier to coordinate, and we can be optimistic about continuing to. Maybe a follow-up question though. Yeah, how sustainable will a growing field be for things like the alignment newsletter? What will happen in the future?
So it's an interesting question because it's already gotten to the point where I can't keep up with it, even if I hadn't also become busy at the same time. So I'm even when I get back to doing the newsletter, it's going to be much more selective about what it talks about than it used to be. Mostly I would be in a functional field, there would be a lot of people trying to do research distillation and producing good summaries of things. And I'm yeah, but somehow I've still produced 80% of the summaries in the last 3 years. Maybe that's a slight overestimate, maybe? I'm not sure.
I don't know if it's that much of an overestimate.
Yeah, it may not be. So what I would like to say is that more people will do more summaries. I don't know if I actually make that prediction, though.
I think probably training models do it.
Someday, yes. I don't think current models are likely. I don't know. We haven't actually tried fine-tuning a model on all of the alignment newsletter summaries.
We've got a good training set there, I guess.
Yeah, it might work. I would bet against, but it's not crazy.
Cool. So we've got just a few more minutes, so I'll ask a few more questions about what people in the room can sort of do next and things like that. So do you have any thoughts about whether pivoting from non-technical backgrounds into a technical background is good? For example, a conversion master's. Do you think that's generally a good option, or given the amount of ML engineers already working on this, that something else would be better?
Super obvious thing to say to that is well, it depends what else you would do, right? And it depends what your background already is. Does seem to be some element of truth to the fact that some people just seem kind of more naturally geared towards kind of technical or kind of quantitative sorts of lines of work. And if you just have if you have a strong aversion to that, presumably you wouldn't be asking this question. So maybe you don't have a totally strong aversion to that. Yeah, I don't know what I want to say here. I think it really, really does depend on what else you would do. As Rohin pointed out, like alignment is not the only thing out there, and there are huge numbers of other problems which can benefit from skills which do not include ML engineering. The caveat to that is, of course, or the kind of immediate counterpoint to that is that, you know, like a kind of quick detour into kind of like understanding like a more technical subject and skilling up in those sorts of things could be also robustly useful across like many of those other things. So that's not to say like you shouldn't try. And if you think AI is going to be big, whatever kind of happens, and that it might interact with kind of other things you're interested in, then kind of gaining some knowledge of that now is not a bad idea, and could be kind of, yeah, like I say, quite robust. But I think, yeah, it so much depends on what the other thing would be.
Yeah, so I agree with that, definitely. I agree, very obvious point. I think we'd struggle to find people who disagreed with it.
Yeah.
Maybe someone who's like, alignment is like 10 to the 10x more important than everything else. Therefore, in practice, you must always do it. But anyway, it's not a thing I believe. So assuming you have made your responsible choice and you've like looked at all of the other things and you're like, none of those things are for me, I'm going to do alignment, or at least that seems like a very plausible option for me. What then do you do if you don't have technical skills yet? I think I'm maybe not as keen on doing the master's directly. I would probably be more keen on you just picking up programming yourself, maybe a like programming boot camp, or maybe just doing self-study. And seeing how much you like that and or are good at that. It doesn't preclude you from doing AI alignment work if you're not good at that, but it's like pretty close. It rules out a fair number of the possibilities. The other part, like, and then if you succeed at that, if you think that went well, then I would maybe think about a machine learning master's, ideally a research-focused one. Yeah. But if you find that the programming doesn't really work out, you didn't like it very much, the other option is to like read a bunch of conceptual stuff. The alignment forum is a good place for that, and see if you like can do other, see if you can then like try writing a new blog post that's also conceptual in the same way. See whether people actually like the things that you've written. I think this is like a harder path to go down, and also harder to test because like, I don't know, it took me like a year before I felt like I actually had useful things to say that people would have given me good feedback on. Maybe not a year, maybe more like 6 months, but still it was like 6 basically full-time months. But that's a different thing that you can do. Those seem like the two main paths to me.
I agree that there are much cheaper tests to like try and like test your fit out before you just commit to doing a master's. That's a good point.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to add something like, it's just difficult to predict what we're going to need in like the number of years it takes to skill up as well. But like, you can definitely position yourself to be ready or like potentially useful. And I think this relates back to what I was saying about skilling people up in engineering before. Is like, if we started skilling up like undergraduate EAs now, in 3 years, I don't know if we'll still have an engineering bottleneck. I think maybe it's a safe enough bet that we will. Not sure what my point is other than, yeah, one can position oneself to like be involved with AI in various ways, and don't necessarily think it's a bad idea. I guess I spent a couple of years myself in a machine learning engineering role, and like from there I found it easier to jump off into like, I did like a few months of research before moving into the meta space as well. So I guess like there's no clear path here, is my broad point, which you probably picked up.
If there is no clear path, do you think that for the most part it's better for people to try and maintain a really sort of generalist skill set within the AI field? Or are there any specifically neglected areas people should just place a bet on and hope that it's really useful for them to do?
Reasonable follow-up. It seems like getting good at, maybe this relates to like what we can all do as a field together. It's like people should try and get really good at one thing. I and like apply their thing to the problem in the way they see it, in terms of like building up their inside view. So maybe there's prioritization of like try to have new thoughts and like make progress on important research questions. And if you gain traction there, this seems like the most important thing you could do. If not, having like skills around ML, like ML engineering, seems like it will be useful for some time to come. So I think, yeah, I wouldn't encourage people not to try and get good at one thing. But,
yeah, I think I would say that it's true that we're not going to be able to, maybe not going to be able to is strong, but like there will be some surprise roles that we find out in the future that are going to be good. But like what we're going to want then is like people with 5 or 10 years of expertise in that particular kind of role. This is not very action guiding for today. So I think like maybe the takeaway I would have for people in your positions is like, if there's something that you think you can become an expert on, like, you know, top 100 people in the world, or something like that. Maybe that's too high a bar, but like something that you really would be an expert in, and like people would pay like, you know, 6, maybe even 7-figure salaries to have you do things for them. But it doesn't look obviously relevant to the world's most impactful problems today. I think often I would be like, yeah, maybe you should do that if you can do that in that field, but you can't do something analogous in something like machine learning. So that's like maybe one takeaway I'd have from the fact that we can't predict what we'll want in the future. Just in general, experts are valuable. But like if we set that point aside, then I think there like roughly is a fairly clear career path. It's like, you know, figure out, like, learn programming and machine learning is what I would say that path would be. At the point where you like know machine learning pretty well, I think at that point you should just be able to get a job. And if you're not able to get a job, then maybe you should, do I agree with this? I think maybe then you should be like more pessimistic about being able to contribute to this field and maybe trying to do something else. One nice thing about this process is you get a bunch of machine learning skills which are in demand everywhere. So it's like very easy to instead earn to give if that ends up being the situation that you're in.
I guess there's some difficulty around knowing when to stop trying.
I agree there is some
optimal
difficulty
stopping
there.
Problem.
I don't have great advice,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Guess I don't want people to like apply to one thing, get rejected, and never try and get better at machine learning. And like,
Yeah, that's definitely stopping too early.
yeah, seems important to say.
Cool. I think we've got time for one last question. So maybe what I'll ask is, what are the key takeaways that you want people in this room to be thinking about as they're going about the rest of their lives? Or maybe just the next few days, somewhere in the middle.
Well, I'll start with the boring one. DeepMind is going to be hiring very soon. Please apply if you think you have anywhere close to the remotely necessary skills. Things like you can program and you like know some amount of machine learning. It's like, I mean, the bar is relatively high for research engineering, but it's not that hard to apply. And, you know, like maybe, yeah, we're happy to get lots of applications, even if you think you're not ready for the role. I should think of more takeaways that are not quite so specific.
What takeaways do I want to say?
I think I could have a go. Mine are like short catchphrases, something like, I think this was coined by J.J. Hepburn, who works at AI Safety Support, but I'm stealing it. Like, the application is not the applicant. So like, this relates to what I was saying before. Keep trying for a bit. I'm not sure when to stop. don't be disheartened, and in the meantime, continue to gain skills that could make you an expert and able to help out in this huge problem we have and don't know the answers for yet. Thanks for trying.
I don't know if I had a good takeaway to conclude on, really. I think both of those are nice. Yeah, maybe, although maybe also, I don't know, there's sometimes it feels like within EA there's like kind of an like overemphasis on AI safety and like, which I'm not to say, I don't know, maybe, yeah, maybe you can want to push back on this in a second, but like you also don't need to become an ML engineer. You can do lots of other useful things. You know, your value as a person is not judged by your propensity to be an ML engineer. Maybe that's it. Yeah, that's my takeaway.
Any pushback, or shall we move on that?
I don't really want to push back on that final bit, but maybe like...
I'm not going to push back on the final thing, actually.
Great.
I don't know. Maybe I want to push back on, not from like my actual beliefs, but from the perspective of all the other AI safety people who aren't in the room here, of like, man, in fact, AI safety is just like the biggest problem we're going to face in the future, in the near future, the one that we have the most ability to influence today. I think I agree with that statement. But they would like put like much larger factors on it than I would, where they'd be like orders of magnitude more, such that like maybe you really should be trying, even if you look like you have, like, even if it looks like you're 10x better at something else. They might say you should maybe still be trying to do AI alignment instead. That's not my actual view. I think if you're like 10x better at biosecurity, I would be like, you should go do biosecurity. If you're 10x better at basketball, I think I would say you should do AI alignment. It depends on the field, obviously. But so that is maybe some pushback, maybe unclear if I even disagree with you.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for answering those questions. Thank you for submitting them. Enjoy the rest of the day.